Ramchal writes in his Sefer Das Tfunis that there's two ways to look at the world. There's mitzideinu, which means our point of view, how we participate in the world, how our actions affect the world, and there's mitzido, how what Hashem's plan is in this world, how He's leading the world, how He's guiding the world. For example, that right now we're in Galus and Thornhill. Why are we in Galus and Thornhill? Because when we had the Beis HaMikdash, we made choices, and these choices resulted in exile and Galus, and therefore we went from exile to exile, from country to country, until we ended up here in Thornhill. That's our point of view. Hashem's point of view, He has His design, He has His plan, and we can't know His plan, but He has His own, and His plan has nothing to do with our actions. He's guiding the world how He's guiding the world. And really the great mystery is how these two plans coincide. How do they work together? How does our plan, our actions have effects, and Hashem's design, which seem to, it goes above, it's unaffected by our actions, how these two plans could coexist, how they converge. The Torah, or the Ishbitzer Rebbe, writes that on the second day of creation, the Torah tells us that the waters were split. The water used to be one unit, then it got split, and we had the upper waters and the lower waters. And in between these two waters, to make sure they can't reconnect, a rakia was formed, a firmament was created. The Ishbitzer Rebbe says that this is really a metaphor for this idea that we said, that there's 2 points of views in this world. There's beneath the rakia, our point of view, how we affect the world, and then there's above the rakia, Hashem's point of view, Hashem's plan. And just like the water can't pierce the rakia, this firmament, and go reconnect to the waters that's above the firmament, so too we can't leave our world and really understand Hashem's world. This is the great mystery, which when Moshiach will come, maybe we'll understand. So because this is such a mystery, therefore whenever we speak about the plan of the world, where the world's going to end up, we always speak about our point of view, since we don't really understand Hashem's point of view. But today I want to maybe pose a question in Hashem's point of view, to try to understand Hashem's point of view and how the world's going. If someone were to tell you you create the world, how would a person here create the world? How would I create the world? How does one create the world? So just personally, I would think that it would be similar to building a house. First, what you do is you bring all the materials, you build the foundation, you start from step 1, and you go as you get more and more, as the project moves more and more along, so the house becomes more and more built up. You start from the foundation, then the walls, finally the bricks, the roof, everything becomes more built up from a state of disarray to becoming more and more into one beautiful house. It becomes so nice. You put on the roof, you put on the door, you bring in the furniture, you have a beautiful house. You started from a place that you can't live in, and you ended up with a beautiful house which hopefully will last many years. But if we look at the world, I would think that so too when you build the world. You start with the world's all in a chaotic state, and it goes, and as the world progresses, as the world moves further along, as every year passes, the world should become more and more wonderful place to live in. That's how I would think how the world would have been built if I was designing the world, if I was building the world. But when we look at the world, what we find is the exact opposite. We find that first, Gan Eden, Adam Arishon is placed in this beautiful garden, everything's there, everything's wonderful, and then he sins. And then he gets kicked out, and then it gets worse. We reach another high point, we get the Beis HaMikdash, and the Jewish nation sins. And we get exiled. So true, from our point of view, we understand we made choices, and the result of these actions, and the result of our actions is the temple gets destroyed. So we could understand that in our point of view. But what's Hashem's plan? As the world progresses, things just get deteriorate and deteriorate. The first Korban, the second Korban, the second Beis HaMikdash doesn't have all the utensils that the first Beis HaMikdash has. It goes worse. The second Korban, now we have to write down Gemara. Then we have the Inquisition, the period of Rishonim ends. The brilliant minds are no longer. And it goes and goes, it gets worse and worse until where we are today, until boom, Mashiach's going to come. What's the plan? How do we understand the world? This seems so the opposite, just so diametrically opposite of how we would have designed the world, or at least how I would have designed the world. What's Hashem's big plan? how do we understand how the world is developing? There's a similar question about in Galus. There's a fascinating Gemara in Bechoros, in page 8b. So over there's a long Gemara that goes. It speaks that Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania was dared by the Caesar to bring the wise men of Athens to him, and the Gemara relates these were the most brilliant minds of all of Greece, and Greece, we know, possessed the most brilliance of minds. So we're speaking about the most brilliant people in the world, and Yeshua ben Hanani was told, bring them to the Caesar. So Yeshua ben Hanani accepts the challenge, and the Gemara relates how he had to go find them using his ingenuity to figure out a way to find them, how to speak to them. And over there, and the Gemara relates their entire debate. The questions are cryptic, and each question is more difficult to understand than the next. Svarim have been written to explain this piece of Gemara, this debate between this wise men of Athens and Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania. One of the questions posed is a question like this. The wise men of Athens asked Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, what happens if salt begins to spoil? How do you preserve salt? So we all know that salt is a preservative. So really the question is, how does one preserve a preservative? That's the Gemara's question. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania answers him with the embryonic sac of a mule, meaning a mule can't give birth, but so the answer also doesn't make sense. So how do we understand? And that's really how they respond to him. Does a mule give birth? They retorted. So he answers back, does salt spoil? That's the end of that question. And the Gemara proceeds, it goes on to the next question. What does this mean? What was the question? What was the answer? The whole thing seems appropriate, I guess, for the wise men of Athens, but how do we understand it? So Reb Chaim Volozhiner, and either, I think it's a Rosh Hashanah drasha, was written down afterwards, but he says that the question was like this, that there was a treaty between Hashem and the Jewish people. There was a bris melech. There was a treaty of salt. That means a treaty that would be forever. That Hashem would always take the Jewish people and always bring them back. There will always be a geula. But ask the wise men of Athens, but that's an impossible thing. Because if sin causes gullus, the reason why we left Eretz Yisrael, why we were exiled into the other lands, was because of sin. And we know the result of gullus, like the Pasuk tells us, is sin. V'yavadetem sham Elokim maisi yedei. When you get exiled and you go out to the other countries, what are you going to do there? How are you going to spend the time there? You're going to spend it serving idolatry. If sin causes gullus, and gullus causes more sin, ask the wise men of Athens, what's the hope? You'll never get out of gullus. How will you ever leave gullus? It must be that bris melech, that treaty of salt, it has to start to decay, has to start to spoil. That treaty can't be, because there is no possible way for one to leave gullus. That's what they asked him. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania tells him back, no, with the embryonic sac of a mule, which means that the only way for one to produce an embryonic sac is if he goes through birth pains. The birth pains of the barren one, these contractions demonstrate that the mule isn't barren. So too salt, says Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, so too this bris, this treaty which we have with Hashem, that Hashem will always redeem us, that also isn't nullified, that also isn't bottled, that also still is a salt, is preserved. That won't ever be destroyed. And what are you going to tell me? That sin causes gullus and gullus causes sin, so there is no way out. So it will be birth pains. What means is, like the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, if the Jewish people don't come to tshuva on their own, then Hashem will appoint a leader that will cause one, a Haman, and throughout history the different leaders that cause the Jewish people to do tshuva. So that's what Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania told him, and this was the debate between Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania. Rav Hirsch says, what's tshuva? What is tshuva? That everyone has different pshatim and tshuva. Maybe this is a new one, but probably not. But just to say, Rav Hirsch says, what's tshuva? Rav Hirsch says that tshuva is really a realignment. Before one does tshuva, what's driving him? Where's his focus? What's important to him? The sin that he did, the thing that brought him to sin. All of a sudden, boom, he does tshuva. What changes? Until now he was focused on one thing, and now he becomes focused on another thing. Before he was focused on physicality, which brought him to sin, and then pleasures and physical pleasures, and now all of a sudden he realigns himself, refocuses himself, and he takes on a whole new outlook. Now what drives him, what is important to him is spirituality, is reconnecting to Hashem. Before, Hashem wasn't important in my life, boom, now Hashem's important in my life. That's tshuva, a total refocus. He says with this idea, with this understanding, he explains the Gemara Mo'ikat, and Rashi brings it out in Parshas Chukas, that the Gemara asks, we find that the death of Miriam is juxtaposed to Paraduma. What's the connection between the death of Miriam and Paraduma? So the Gemara answers to teach you that just like we know karbanos, sacrifices could bring forgiveness. If someone does a sin, he brings a chatas, he brings a sin offering, and if someone does other sins, he could bring an olah, and a person could be forgiven through sacrifices. So the Gemara says the reason why Miriam's death is juxtaposed to sacrifices, because just like sacrifices, just like karbanos have the ability, they bring forgiveness, so too the death of a righteous person also brings forgiveness. How do we understand that? A righteous person is nifter and boom, everyone's forgiven? What does this mean? So Rav Hirsch explains with this idea that when someone great dies, a person concludes that there has to be more to life than this world. It can't be. Such a distinguished personality. How could he be identified with the body that lays inert in front of us? It just can't be. Only one who's blind could possibly not realize that there's not more to life than this. It has to be that there's more to life than this, because such a person who spent his whole life and developing himself, and it just can't be that it all ends here. There has to be another world. He says this realization, this understanding causes someone to change his whole outlook. Before this event, this world was the only world. But now that this event, now that a righteous person was nifter, and he realizes that there has to be more to life than this, it can't be that the entire life is this world, then he all of a sudden now this world isn't the total focus, because there's another world, there's a next world, and that's tshuva, a total refocusing, a reorganization of priorities. That's tshuva, a realignment of one's outlook in life. That's tshuva, and with this is really a deeper understanding, could be to Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah's answer. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah told the wise men of Athens, this brilliant mind, they asked Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah, if sin causes galus and galus causes sin, there's no way out. Says Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah, you know the answer? The answer is there's going to be a wicked man, there's going to be a leader that subjugates, that terrorizes, that forces the Jewish people to do tshuva. There'll be birth pains, there'll be struggle and pain, and this will cause the people to do tshuva. What does that mean? So, according to this means that true galus could cause the Jewish people to do sin, and really, what galus? Why did really as a result of galus, a person is goals and what really is important to us who are in galus is what the other nations feel are important. And if that's true, then there's no way out of galus. It will just get worse and worse as whatever the nations will dictate to us what's important. Says Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah, no, because what's going to happen, there's going to be a leader that will force us to reassess what's important. We'll realize that what the nations hold to be true, hold to be dear, hold to be important, cannot be the focus, because look where it's bringing us. It's getting us terrorized. It's getting us attacked from the leaders. So that will cause us weight. We can't depend on the nations. They're not dependable. What they hold dear won't help us. And therefore we'll refocus. There has to be something more. There has to be something beyond what the other nations say. And then we'll search for something that's dependable. And then we'll come to realization that there's one thing that's dependable, and that's Hashem. And that's tshuva, a refocus. Until what drove us would be what the nations hold to be important, and afterwards, what will drive us is this realization that the only thing that's dependable in this world is Hashem, is spirituality, and that's tshuva. And that's what Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah told the leaders of these brilliant minds in Athens. True, the bris. It's true, sin causes galus, and galus causes sin. But the the embryonic sac, the placenta of a mule, will cause that the salt doesn't spoil. This leader that is appointed will cause the Jewish people to do tshuva. And that was the debate in the Gemara in Bechoros. I just to explain. So how do we see this in Galus? So Rav Hutner, he gave a talk to educators, and in this talk, in this class, he described an unfolding pattern in our Galus. In a pattern where promises were made and then broken, a pattern where rights were granted then revoked, a pattern that continues today. The French Revolution, they granted rights. As the result of the French Revolution, equal rights were granted to Jewish people, and later on we know that Napoleon, after he took over, he, although a proponent of liberty, he enacted the intolerable edict which limited the Jewish people where they could live. They restricted their jobs. This continued the Treaty of Versailles, which ended World War I. So we know the result of what ultimately happened with the the tragic Nuremberg laws that stripped the Jewish people of all their rights as citizens. This continued in Russia. 1917, Lenin signed the Soviet Minorities' Rights Act, which granted rights to Jewish peoples, and even allowed for a Jewish autonomy, a Jewish form of self-government. But that lasted till 1920s when Stalin took over. And this continued in 1917, the famous British, the Balfour Declaration, when the British declared in a famous, well-known quote, Her Majesty's government looks favorably upon the establishment of the Jewish home. And this, but when we needed it most, the white papers denied, restricted immigration to the Jewish country, to Israel, to almost zero when we needed it most. And even now it continues today. Our greatest ally, America, for Israel. So how do they show their alliance? They show their tremendous lack of support for Israel and Israeli security. They push for the disbandment of settlements. They allow Iran to develop their nuclear technology. And this continues. They send weapons and support to the enemies in the region surrounding us. They try to pressure, making a peace treaty which is not necessarily to our advantage. And this continues. He says this pattern of this is a new pattern that developed in our Galus. Before this, there was pogroms, there were attacks, there were physical attacks on the Jewish people. This was something new. This is something that was unheard of. That the Jews, they no longer used physical ways of attacking the Jewish people, but they used really legal ways of pressuring and attacking the Jewish people. Something new to this Galus, Rav Hutner pointed out. The Jews were deluded into trusting the Gentiles, and each time after time to be sorely disappointed. Rav Hutner says that this is really predicted in Psukim, in Parshas Vayelech. In Perek Lamed Aleph, Pasuk Tezayin, it says, Moshe is telling, Hashem's giving Moshe the last message he's going to be given before he leaves this world. And Hashem tells him, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Hashem tells Moshe, Hincha shochiv emavesecha, you're going to go lie down with your fathers, you're going to pass on, Vikam, and Vikama amazeh, and this nation will get up, Vizana achrei elehi nechar haaretz, which Onkelos translates, you'll be drawn after the lure of the nations. Asher hu bashama bekirbo, which you're in their midst. Va'azavani, you'll forsake me. V'hefer es brisi, and you'll disregard my treaty. Asher karati ito, which I have made with you. V'chara api, and my anger will flare, and I will forsake you, and I will hide my face from you, and you'll be at the whim and the will, and your fate will be will be dependent on the whims of the nation. That was one of the Moshe's last message that he told. Rav Hutner says that there are two things that were predicted in these psukim. The first thing that was predicted is that terrible punishments will come because of the Jewish people relying on the nations. The Jews will rely on the nations, and the result will be that Hashem will hide His face. That's one thing that's predicted. And then it continues, and it says, as a result of this, will cause the beginning of the tshuva process in the Jewish people. The Jewish people will acknowledge, like we said, that the evil that comes upon us shows that the other nations aren't dependable, and therefore the only one to turn to is to Hashem. That's where Futner explains this parsha. That the effect of the Jewish suffering will be create an environment that will be conducive to tshuva. The Jewish people will realize that we can't put hope in and faith into other nations, because each time will be time after time, whether it's the 1917, it's in the Balfour Declaration, we put our trust into that, and then that ends a disaster. And each time we put our trust into another nation, 1917 with Lenin, the result of 3 years later Stalin, whatever it is, anytime we put our trust into another nation, we're again disappointed. And it will come, and the Jewish people will come to realize that really there is no dependable nation, there is no dependable legal treaty that one could fully just say, okay, it's the law, there's the UN, there's nothing in legal in this world that we could say, that's it, now we're safe. The only thing the Jewish people will come to realization, will come to realize that the only thing that is dependable is Hashem Himself, and Hashem running the world Himself. And the result will be, again, this realignment, this refocus on what's real, what's not real in this world, and the result will be tshuva. And then Moshiach will come. We ask, what's Hashem's plan? What's the whole purpose? The whole world going bad to worse. It started off great, and then went from bad, and then went from worse, and then continued to deteriorate. From the sin of Adam to the first Korban, from the Korban to the Inquisition, and etc., things just get worse and worse. What will happen? This will continue. The Psukim tell us until the Jewish people do tshuva and once again becomes davak and becomes connected once again to Hashem. But what will change is we won't have that same relationship that Adam Arishan had with Hashem. The relationship that Adam Arishan had with Hashem won't come close to the relationship that we'll have after all the gullahs. After we went through and realized that everything else in the world is not real, after we've experienced every form of persecution, every form of gullahs, and we saw how bad everything else is, and how unreal, how fake everything else is, if it's not Hashem. After we've experienced everything, then our connection to Hashem will be so much greater than if we never had experienced anything at all. Hashem's plan is that when we do tshuva, Mashiach will come, we'll have such a connection, such an intimate, close connection, which would not have been possible without gullahs. Rav Dessler asks, he has a very interesting question. He says the 3 weeks precede in the Jewish calendar it goes, we have 3 weeks. Afterwards there's 7 weeks of nechama, of consolation, where we read the 7 haftarahs dealing with consolation. Afterwards we have Elul. Then we have Sukkot at the time of Simcha. And then Simchas Torah, and then the year continues. So we have times of when we mourn, consolation, judgment, happiness. What's the connection between all of these things? They're so close, one just follows into the other one. What's the connection? So Rav Dessler says that the idea of that connection is this as well. What we do is when we had the Beis HaMikdash, we relied on the Beis HaMikdash. We relied on that structure. We said the walls were impregnable. The warriors we have are undefeatable. Well, we relied on everything. And then we told ourselves, then Hashem showed us it's not true. Once that point when Hashem told us it's not true, that's the first step to tshuva, the realization that nothing in this world is strong enough, is big enough to be able to protect us. That's already the first step. That's the first step of the consolation. That this realization that nothing in this world is how thick the walls are, how great the structure is, it's not strong enough to protect us. That's the beginning of the nechama, of the consolation. That's the beginning of tshuva. That's why we go right into judgment afterwards. We've already started the tshuva process. And then finally, after that, we have this great simcha when we, once again in the sukkah, we reconnect and we come so close that we're sitting in the sukkah, which the Gemara says in Sukkot, that the walls themselves have the kedusha, have holiness. It's as if we're sitting in the Beis HaMikdash itself, because we've went through everything. We've realized that nothing in this world is real. That we've started the tshuva. We went and we repented. We realigned ourselves and we came once again close to Hashem, and this intimate connection where with us and Hashem are now sitting together in a sukkah, and that's the reason why the 3 weeks are followed by the Nechama, which are followed ultimately by Sukkot, because the process starts by the realization, like Rav Hutner says, and that nothing in this world we could rely on except for Hashem, and that's really. And once we come to this realization, really that nothing else is real, when Moshiach does come, after the Jewish people have this realization, do tshuva, then we'll have this intimate connection, the closest connection we would have had if we would not have had, if the world would have built from the bottom up. Hashem built the world the way He did, because it really makes it the most. Because after the world is built, after the structure is broken down and then rebuilt, the building that's now built will be the most beautiful building that we are able to have.
Sure.
Yes. Sorry.
Oh, sure.
Go ahead.
Well, since you're talking about the tshuva, and you actually touched that point a little bit, because my understanding an example will be with, of course, with Purim. When we done tshuva there, we were all united in one. We not in Israel, but we were under same control and kind of concentrated in one place.
Right.
Today, how the tshuva would happen, because we spread it all over the world, and even in Israel, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, I don't consider it kind of 100% our country by looking what's going on when they're ready to, as you said, give up 90% of our land just to appease United States. And in the United States we had almost the population of Israel. So how the tshuva could happen, like my understanding is when the total tshuva will start happening, we should be all united in one place. So my question is, before Moshiach, well, we also know that Moshiach is going to collect us and put in one place, right. But my understanding, like, okay, I understand tshuva in Israel, okay, we are surrounded by enemies, like in 67, we have to do tshuva to fight them. Right. The guys in the US, what they're going to do? Guys in Canada, like us, guys in Europe, well, now they're going to. So my question is how you foresee that, as you said, the ruler will come, the only one ruler, if you will, I can see coming to make us all tshuva, which he came and keep doing it in past, I think, over 1,000 years, right. Which is Muhammad and his followers, that their followers pressuring us and the rest of the world to do the tshuva. So my really question, how you foresee a tshuva happening in the situation where we are right now?
So I mean, you're asking that since we're so separate and not all of us are threatened at the same time, so maybe, I understand that, let's say, people in Israel who feel the threat on their backs all the time, but if, let's say, people in America, it's much safer in America, so there'll be less of a push to do tshuva?
Yeah, something like that, yeah, like, and tshuva is supposed to, like, when Moshiach comes, everybody's supposed to feel it.
Right.
So,
no, it's a very good question, but maybe, first of all, there's two things that change in modern world. Well, at least one thing that's really, the whole world's connected, and we know exactly what's going on in every. We even know. I remember when I was in Israel, so I was there for 2.5 years. So if I wanted to know news about Israel, I had to call America. Like, we know the news in Israel much better than America, and because of that, we feel the threat, because everyone has. I mean, we all want Israel to survive, and it's important. It's a Jewish country. So because of this, so we all have a feeling, so if they're threatened, it's not just a threat on the country, it's a threat on the Jewish people. It's because it's a threat on the Jewish people, we're threatened as well. And because we're threatened, so it will also push us. Because they are our brothers in Eretz Yisrael as well, they're our brothers in Israel, so therefore that will cause us to do tshuva.
I think it's also a good point to make, though. Like in the '67 war, I've heard stories, that maybe it was the '73 war, so Yom Kippur War, that they were almost defeated. It was very tenuous, and there were thousands of people Jews from all over the world, specifically from Europe and from America, who actually went over to Israel and fought. There was a story that somebody ran into an old folks home and said, happened to be in a good area, and said, Israel needs money, we need to... I think the story goes, in like 5 minutes they had $6 million or something, because they were very rich guys.
In New York, they were collecting money in Manhattan on the street corners. I remember.
Yeah. So we, in a way, we are all together, but it's not in the traditional way. The traditional way was we were all in one place.
And we're unified by Israel's the unifying factor of how these.
And by technology and by airplanes, we are all connected in a way that maybe wasn't the traditional way of just being all in the same country. But
right, yeah, and I mean, it's just also, I mean, each one of us, even it's our. When I was in Israel, my cousin was in an army there, so it's my family itself. Literally, besides the larger family, it's my immediate family, and also that everyone davens for them. It's a real close connection that, right, like you're saying, that the support and
I want to talk about a couple of concepts. You talk in the beginning about how in the creation of the physical world there's a separation out of two waters and then a creation of solid earth.
Okay.
And I'd like you to expand on that concept of creation and then talk about how creation can be implemented in this everyday goas and how it allows one to see through the appearances and use that concept, and then ultimately how it brings Moshiach. Tie it together.
So I'm not sure exactly, but let me
tie your concepts together.
So let me
with creation,
right?
And how, because the name of the talk is how to bring Moshiach.
Right. Okay.
So tie it together.
So here it goes. We'll give it a shot. Okay. So they started off this year was this idea that the Rakia, this firmament, this earth in between the two waters, is really a metaphor where you have 2 points of view. And so we mentioned that we can't understand Hashem's point of view, but He does have a plan. We don't know exactly what the particulars of the plan is, but we do, based on what we do see, and really this Ramchal speaks out in Das Tunis, is as the world gets worse and worse, we have Hashem's good.
Start with creation. What do you mean by creation from with God's plan? How does that...
So there's a pasuk. There's a pasuk in the second pasuk in the Torah. It says, I believe it's the second. First few pasukim, it says v'choshech al pnei atehom, and it goes to. Here, let me just check up the exact language. So it says like this. It says va'aretz hayasayu v'vayu, and the translator here, the earth was astonishingly empty. But okay, that's when v'choshech al pnei atehom, and there was like darkness. The translator over here, and darkness upon the surface of the depths. The Midrashim tell us that each one of these words, sohu, vohu, and choshech, really represents a different galus. So right away at the beginning of creation, that you see already that Hashem's plan was to have different exiles. So right away there was this plan. In creation was this first thing.
So galus is illusions,
is alluded to
appearances, but in the idea of creation, you have a separation and then a creation of waters and earth.
Right.
So you create. So it's separation and expansion.
Okay.
Along with appearances. Because you're saying that as Hashem, or in that Mishra, that there's appearances along with real creation. Do you know what I'm getting at?
Actually, there's. Let me see if I could rephrase it just in the way I'm. That you're saying that choshech literally means choshech, but then there's the midrashim say it also has like another meaning as well.
I'm saying that there may be many meanings. I'm trying to find out what you're...
No, I'm just saying that in Hashem's plan already, in the creation from step one, just like the mouth of Bilam's donkey was created, that was part of Hashem's plan from the beginning, so too that the Jews would have to go through exile was also part of Hashem's plan. So that's already from step one.
Galus was created.
Galus was
just when the world was created.
When it was all created,
part
right,
of
that
creation.
plan.
Part of creation. Okay.
That plan of that plan of Galus was part of creation. So that means.
Yeah, I'm going to question what you said.
Okay. Well, I should.
What are you saying about the Galus? That it was a plan of creation.
Right. Okay. Fine. We'll get there. So now.
Okay.
So as it continues, so now we see. So if that's part of the basic blueprint of creation, it has to serve a purpose. It can't just be just a punishment. So it means already in the blueprint, there's a purpose and a place for exile. So what is that? That means the house is built to self-destruct. It doesn't. That needs it under.
As soon as you bring in separations and then creation of other entities, you have to bring in halacha, truths, which allow us to pierce through the illusions and see the elements that we can create, construct.
Okay.
Is that so? I'm throwing it out.
Well, it's true. Galus is an illusion. I mean, there is an illusion that other things, based on the way that the Rav Hutner says it, there's an illusion that some things are dependent. The world looks like things are dependable. Law is dependable. That's an illusion. So that's similar. We have to be able to pierce through that. Once we're able to pierce through that, if we do it by ourselves, that's fantastic. But sometimes Hashem needs to help us.
We need Torah.
So the Torah is right. If you have the Torah, that's fantastic. That's really the best way. The best would have been if Adam Rishon never sinned.
Yeah.
We're going all the way back to what's the ideal. But now that we have, so Hashem gave us a help. He gave us Torah. And so now Torah, will that help us? Depends. We'll see if.
Are you saying though that Adam Rishon had to have sinned?
That's a great question.
Because if Galus is built into creation,
that's a very good question.
Then he had. How do you get to Galus?
That's a fantastic question.
Well,
and Nesiva Shalom says.
And that follows the creation that Moshe had seen with the rock. That follows the creations that it was already put in like. Jonathan, son of Shaul, didn't have a choice to die because otherwise him, and if he would have survived and they won that war and Shaul didn't sin, him and David could have bring the Moshiach. We have a next step where the son of splitting of the two kingdoms and again sin. Like we had a lot of opportunities where the Moshiach should come and didn't come.
Right.
So we had opportunities before actually the first Galus, second Galus started, first is Egypt. So we had the opportunity to never have the second, third Galus.
Right. So that's really a fantastic question. So there's a Sefer Nesiva Shalom from the Slonim Rebbe. So I forgot which parsha he writes in. I believe I'm not even going to say. But so in there he writes that really the Galus wasn't a necessity, at least from our point of view. He's not again speaking about Hashem's point of view. So now let's go beneath the Rekina. Galus was not a necessity. It did not have to be. There were two tracks for the world to go. Just like you have, maybe an example would be you have a student, you have a class, you're a teacher. So you have let's say you have I know my wife teaches, so sometimes what she does, she'll have two tests. She'll have like the test that everyone takes, and then she'll have a test that let's say for like an easier test. So if everyone, let's say, was brilliant, so there's no need for the second test. But once we're in a situation where it's like b'diavad, it's only after the fact. So now the second test is necessary. So similar to the thing that Nesiva Shalom says over here. Ideally, Adam Rishon shouldn't have sinned. We shouldn't have ever needed to be exiled. But there were two tracks that the world were created with. There was one track, the straight track, the boom going straight up, and then there was the longer track. In the longer track, so in this world there were two tracks. That's how he explains it. It's true, Adam Rishon did not have to sin, and if he wouldn't have sinned, like the Chazal tell us, we would have gotten. Again, this is all from our point of view.
One A and one B.
Right, exactly.